Hello, everyone. Welcome to the President's Live Briefing. We have about 172 people registered to join us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lemons. Actually, one moment. I just want to remind you that the Q&A button is here for you if you have questions, and please utilize it as you see fit. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lemons.
Thank you, Joshunda, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this President's Live Briefing. Just to remind everybody, this is not Thursday, it's Wednesday. I'm reminding myself so that I don't think tomorrow is Friday, since we've been having these briefings almost every week on Thursday. So it is Wednesday afternoon, and I'm happy to be joined again by Provost Nwosu and Vice President Rotolo. We have not planned for any presentations for this briefing, so it's going to be largely Q&A. I'm going to give you just a little update now, and then we will go to Q&A, and we will try to respond to most of the questions that that come up in the Q&A chat. So I just have to note that yesterday was a historic day, and this is not a political comment. This is really just a comment about a major milestone that has been passed in the United States, and that is the nomination of Kamala Harris to be Joe Biden's vice presidential candidate, and another really kind of major landmark. And again, not a political endorsement, really just a comment that this is a significant new happening that I think hopefully, irregardless of politics, we should be happy about. There's no news on the budget, and we continue month to month. I think that our view of what's happening in Washington, D.C. is even less hopeful than it was a week ago. We're really not seeing anything. And so this really keeps us on our course, which we think we have been now for at least the last month, which is that we really are going to be operating without a budget, probably through October, more likely through November, and not unlikely that this will be our situation through the calendar year. So no, there's really nothing new to report on that front, other than it's more of nothing. So wanted to say a little bit about the vacancy review board that CUNY has. They are working very hard. They're receiving requests from all 25 CUNY campuses for exceptions to the hiring freeze. And that committee now meets actually twice a week, and have really got a huge number of different exceptions to consider in each one of those meetings. We've had a number there, we've had a number approved, but we also have a number that are pending. And that, as you recall, follows our own Lehman College review process, which has both an academic and an administrative side, and then a final vacancy review that's done that includes what comes from both of those two groups. So they continue to meet, and we have to very carefully make a case for any exception to the hiring freeze. And the most important really is holding salaries, because any increases are really a very, very heavy load to lift for CUNY's VRB, Vacancy Review Board. They are approving exceptions to the hiring freeze, but largely looking for salary savings is one of the ways that those approvals are justified to the CUNY Board of Trustees, and ultimately to the state budget director and the governor. So we're working on it. We are, I think, doing an excellent job at Lehman College to handle this in the way that is as successful as that can be for us. So we know that our staffing is really critical. There are many critical staffing needs that are not met, and we're doing everything we can to go through that process that's been laid out and fill those positions. The Student Government Association had their own town hall recently, and I received a really detailed report from them about what was discussed. And there were a number of really important issues that were raised by them, and these are concerns that we follow up and will follow up on. I'll just list a few of the ones that were noted in the report. Food insecurity remains a very big issue for our students. And also housing, of course, housing concerns and homelessness are concerns that were raised in that session. There also are concerns about safety on campus. How will we be safe on campus? How will students be safe on campus if they do come on for one of the very few classes that will be held on campus? So, and that is a very important concern to have. And then the need for more access to student services, including mental health counseling, advising, and others. And I think most of us really are aware of our need to do everything we can to make those services available, particularly now that most of those are being done remotely. And students at times have had frustrations with those. It's really, it's a limitation that partly goes back to what I mentioned before that has to do with the Vacancy Review Board and our ability to fill key positions in those offices. Individuals and staff are very committed to our students, but each individual can only do so much. And I think we've asked a lot, we've expected a lot, and we've gotten a lot from the staff in those offices that are really front-facing to students. But as I said, we will try to continue to do what we can to fill positions that are really in critical places, and also keep looking for ways that we can improve the remote access that students will really be relying on in the fall term if they're going to access counseling and advising and other services. Another frustrating point that students pointed out is just finding the available courses on CUNY First. And that's, again, not a surprise to any of us. We all have our own experiences with CUNY First that we can think about. So it's not one that we can immediately address for students. It's university-wide, built into the system. We do have coming along some fairly near-term time frame, we do have an upgrade to the CUNY First system that's coming. It's version 9.2. It promises to, although it's not really a replacement for CUNY First at all, it does have a lot of outward-facing changes, user interface changes that should make it a more usable system for us. CUNY First is going to sunset in 2030. And the university is already well along the way to beginning this process of deciding what will replace it and how that will go. So it's a long-term process. We're going to be living with CUNY First for quite some time, but hopefully the 9.2 version will ease some of the difficulties that students particularly have in getting onto it, finding classes, and doing the things that they need to do on CUNY First. Speaking of IT, we do have now a completed contract with Zoom, which is going to give all of our faculty access and without those time limitations and other limitations. We are working individually as a college to look at options that we might want to secure with Zoom, things like webinar and other options that are really going to be up to individual campuses to decide whether they want to extend the functionality of Zoom in various ways. Final word about safety, and that was raised by the students. We will have even fewer students on campus now than we thought a week ago. We have more classes that had been planned for being on campus that will now be off campus as well, will be online. And And that's all helping because the fewer individuals we have on campus, the lower the risk. You may have noticed that this today, the New York Times reported on a study that's just coming out that is another look at the risk of airborne virus, and has documented that viable virus is found in this case, it was in a clinical setting, where there was a room with fairly high air exchange. I think it was 6 air exchanges an hour, which is pretty high, but still found viable virus in the air, and at distances that are, where the 6-foot limit really is not a relevant metric. So we know that's a risk, and that just really reinforces our commitment to minimize the number of people on campus, and for sure to have all of those individuals on campus taking every precaution, including face masks that cover the nose and the mouth. And another study that came out of Duke University, I think this was announced yesterday, that looked at the efficacy of face masks. I actually encourage you to take a look at that study. Not surprisingly, an N95 mask without a valve is the best mask for preventing the viral particles or viral droplets from passing through. Other masks perform pretty well, including cotton masks, if they are high enough density. The very poorest performing masks are things like a pull-up, any kind of a pull-up cloth that comes up from the neck, or things that you see sort of improvised that go around the mouth. Those are really almost worth less than no mask at all, because they afford some sense of being protective, but actually are not protective, are very minimally protective. So do pay attention to that, because that really makes a difference, along with just maintaining distance and all the other precautions. Again, hand hygiene and so on. You'll have to forgive me if I keep stressing these things, but I think along with everyone else that's in a position of leadership, I just think we have to keep saying that, because I just know from my own experience that it's very easy after this very long haul that we're in to just forget or just become a little lax, and we just really can't do that. So we will have signage up. We do have signage up all over campus for those that are coming on campus, to remind everyone in ways that I think are pretty hard to ignore, that we just need to stay vigilant. So that ends my comments. And with that, I would like to ask Provost Nwosu or Vice President Rotolo if there's anything they would like to announce or discuss before we go to the Q&A.
Thank you, President Lemons. Just a very quick update on a few things before we go to the Q&A. Enrollment is one of them. As I mentioned at our last briefing, we have been very successful in terms of summer enrollment. And we have our final numbers for that summer enrollment reflecting an 11% increase from what we had last year. So it's wonderful news, and a gracious thank you to the campus community for the work everybody did to get us to this point. We are looking at the fall numbers. It does appear that we would have the largest freshman class that we've ever had at the campus since free tuition came to the ended in '75, and so that's great news for us. We're expecting more than 1,100 first-time, full-time freshmen for that class, representing a 23% increase from the numbers we had last year. So this is significant milestone for us. Indeed, if you look at the numbers, we're besting all of the CUNY senior colleges in terms of the percentage of increase from what they had last year. So that's very, very positive news for us. I do want to thank our team in enrollment management in the Office of Academic Programs and Educational Effectiveness, our deans, our chairs, for really making the effort to continue to move us towards our goal for fall 2020. I also want to share, Mr. President, you recall yesterday, we did request, we did get a notification from the EVC Cruise and Central Office about a request we had made for almost $94,000 that would allow us to add an additional 15 sections for the classes we plan for fall. We were very fortunate to receive those fundings, and that would go towards paying for an additional number of adjunct faculty to teach those classes. So that's very good news. Those are gateway courses for the most part. It does appear that tomorrow CUNY and the Mellon Foundation will be making some announcements about some major gifts. And we got that portion of money I just mentioned from one of those gifts that the Mellon Foundation is giving to the central office. I also know that there is another portion of that major gift that will be focused on retention and completion. And so we will be applying for or requesting for some of that money to come to us. And when it does come to us, we will target that money for a number of our students who are undocumented students, DACA students, and international students. As everyone recalls, last week, we did indicate that the additional funds were received as a consequence of the CARES Act money. Those funds we released last week to students, and those students were identified as students who are Title IV eligible under the CARES Act funds. And I did send a memo to all of them, some 2,500 students last week. And through the work of our financial aid office and CUNY's approval, the students received that money. Another portion of those funds actually in excess of $400,000. Each student received $470. But another portion of those funds we set aside to address some of the issues you just raised a moment ago with regard to helping students pay for housing, rent, utilities, support, and so on. And we have developed a mechanism to allow us to reach those students. I also know that there is a proposal, this one has to do with technology support. There is a proposal before that CUNY is put together to help us with the issues related to broadband reliability and our students having access to Wi-Fi to be able to do their classes. So CUNY will be purchasing 4,000 of these MiFis, and we would also be requesting some of those for our students to go as loaner devices. So we will be quite prepared as we get ready for fall semester. Thank you.
And I'm going to say that you already gave the update on the budget, which there is no budget, so so I'm good.
Okay, great. Thanks to both of you. So we'll move to some of the questions that have come in. Provost, I'm going to turn back to you with a couple of questions here about online courses. And I wonder if you could just, you've done this in previous briefings, but just give a little outline of what courses will be on campus. We know that, well over 95% are going to be online, but maybe you could go over again, what are the courses that will be on campus? And one of the questions, and I've heard this from students too, is, well, how am I going to know about how to get on my course and where it's going to be offered?
I want to step back and say that we will be communicating to students additional information on that. We began that process last week. First of all, the information we sent to them had to do with their ability to access a Blackboard and how to actually learn online. That message has gone to them. Our plan is to do this every Tuesday and Thursday so that they get email communication from me. The additional communication in terms of coursework would also come from enrollment management that would provide some information in terms of how to access CUNY First. These classes are already in CUNY First. It's just the same the same process that you just talked about. That they would nothing has changed in terms of how we access the system for the classes. Yes, it is true that we are reopening for fall. It is also true that we were in business for summer as we were also for spring. We didn't really close. It was simply a different modality for instruction. Last week when we did have the briefing, we did emphasize that a majority of our courses, well over 95, in fact, well over 98% will be offered in the same distance learning modality that we employed last semester, and we also employed this summer. And there's a tiny percentage that I mentioned that would be offered not in the traditional face-to-face, because I was very careful to say that we don't have really the traditional face-to-face, but it's a modified traditional face-to-face instruction that we will have for these few classes, and Rene can add to that as well. And those classes we've identified with the conversations that we had with deans and department chairs. And they worked with the registrar and VP Rotolo on which classes could actually be brought to campus and in what particular format. And there's another set of classes that I mentioned also that are clinical sections and lab and clinical sections and field placements that will be offered off campus. And those field placements and clinical sections, we're offering them because the students have to graduate, and because also the facilities, off-campus facilities that we work with now are allowing our students to actually engage in those experiences. And that's why we're able to do so in those. And so Rene can speak to some of the things that have also happened much more specifically with a number of our departments, art, music, journalism department, and so on, in terms of those sections, those very few sections in modified form that we are asking to come to campus.
So one thing I would like to add that I believe President Lemons mentioned last week that we submitted our plan to CUNY and we're waiting for approval from CUNY. And he did state that this is a fluid living document that will be constantly updated. And it is being constantly updated. As a matter of fact, as of today, a couple of classes that were supposed to be in-person hybrids with staggered students coming in at different times have now gone fully online. So I think we'll continue to see changes in our document. But some of the things that will be occurring on campus, it's actually about 1.5% of classes not fully on campus, but having some aspects on campus. And again, these will be with students in staggered attendance, and it will be scheduled. But for some examples, our classes will have student critiques in person, but they'll be distancing in the space. They'll stagger it as they need to keep the minimum occupancy in the space. Some classes, such as sculpture, or some classes in the theater, will actually be having just 1 or 2 classes in person to meet the students face to face. Some will be outdoors. Some will be indoors, again on a staggered schedule so that not all students are in the same space at the same time, so they can give instruction on proper use of equipment and things that are expected of the class. There will be very few, and as a matter of fact, I can't think of one class that will actually meet regularly any longer in person. There'll be times where students will come in the ceramics class to have their pieces fired in kilns. Dance students will be coming in to use the sprung floors because we had heard from faculty that students were getting hurt actually doing their performances in their building's hallways where they don't have a sprung floor. So it's a better situation for them to be in person, to be in a space with a sprung floor. But we have very detailed plans about how many are allowed in at a time, how they will access, how they will leave, how they will remain, and that they will have to wear masks at all times. For the clinical and in-field placements, you have education whose students will be in schools, which will be open according to the current plan. You have nursing students who will be in hospitals and other healthcare facilities. You'll have social work students who will potentially be in outside in-field placements. So those are the off-campus types of placements that'll happen. But you'll see that the majority of things are not happening on campus. In one of the other schools, the only thing happening is a midterm exam and for social work, test prep for the exam. And again, it's on a staggered schedule for students, maintaining appropriate social distancing in the spaces. And we are well above the 6 foot that's being recommended by the State Department of Health or the city.
Thank you for that clarification. There have been a few other questions about Zoom and when those licenses will be available. I'm assuming, I don't know this for sure, but I am assuming that we should have that information out to the faculty by this week. But the contract with Zoom, the expanded contract that gives everyone access to it in an unlimited way in terms of time, and the number of participants, I think, is capped at 300 with the license that we have. That was just concluded last week. So I imagine there's a little bit of time that's still required before that information is out, but it will be out in time for the faculty to have it and to run their classes if they're going to be using Zoom. And for sure, all the faculty can plan on having that kind of access to it. So in finalizing plans for delivery of the course through distance, you can assume that you will have that capability. There's a question about faculty and staff returning to campus. Should that be something that seems to be needed? And it's around whether individuals who have some kind of pre-existing condition, or I'm going to just add to that, living with someone in close proximity to someone who does, will there be exceptions for those individuals in terms of coming to campus for their job? And you know, I can answer that and maybe Vice President Rotolo, you want to add to that, because you really shepherded the plan that we've developed for the whole campus, and this is part of it. But in general, we hope not to particularly put anyone at risk who has one of those conditions, because there's enough risk really for everyone, but we certainly don't want individuals with that heightened kind of risk being on campus, exposing themselves or someone that they are living with. Vice President Rotolo, do you want to add to that?
So the plan makes accommodations for people that are at risk or are living with someone at risk. They just need to provide documentation to HR, and they will be allowed to continue working from home. We also, for classes, a student would need to identify to their faculty member that there is an at-risk issue that they have for either themselves or who they're living with, so their faculty member can make accommodations for them. And our plan also includes the availability to create a time period for at-risk persons to be able to, on their own, if they need to retrieve something from campus or be on campus for a reason, we can allocate that time period. And we haven't said it yet because it would, of course, rely on people identifying and let us know. we can set aside that time period for those people to be able to have access to their office, their classroom, where they need, without anyone else around. So yes, we have made accommodations for all of that in the plan.
Great, thank you. So to follow up, Provost, still possibly having or not having now on campus, are there any lab classes that you know of that will be online?
No, not at this point. And I have to thank Dean Mills and the chairs for the excellent work they did in this regard, to work very closely with faculty to ensure that whatever modality we are providing, certainly in this instance, with labs being online, that those serve the needs that and the outcomes that we expect for students. So they've done a great job in this regard.
And I'd like to add to that, there will not be any science labs in person on campus. They're all remote. Research and any students who are involved in research, that is continuing, that is taking place on campus. It has been, we're in our third week now. Seems to be going really well. I don't want to jinx it, I'm knocking wood. And as far as music, there are no music classes taking place on campus. But in fact, over the last few days, we've been receiving orders for equipment and software for students to be able to work remotely and do their schoolwork remotely in music. Same thing's true for science as well. Actually, same thing is true for many programs that rely on specialty equipment or software for students to be able to work remotely.
Great, thank you. One of I think something that has seemed a bit confusing is when you contrast what CUNY is doing with what the city schools are doing, what the mayor is doing in terms of reopening the city schools, because I think that has given a lot of people the impression, or it just raised the question of, well, since they're doing that, why aren't we doing that? And it's true that New York City, I think, is the only, of course, it's the largest school system in the country, but I think it's maybe one of the only large school systems in the country that is going to have some in-person, modified, but some in-person opening for classes. And I think that if you're watching what's happening with colleges and universities around the country, including our area, even those, and many of them did plan to open for in-person classes this fall, have reversed those plans. And we're seeing every day more announcements like that, where they're backing away from having students on campus. And we've been there for some time, and I think we've really called that right, in the sense that, and I'm not casting aspersions on the mayor or city schools and what he's doing there. I think there are a lot of different dynamics and different issues that happen in K through 12 education that aren't issues for us. But I think in our case, I think what we've done, tried to do consistently, is plot the safest path that we can while we deliver the education that we want to deliver and the services to students. And I think we feel pretty comfortable that we have taken those two things into account, and that what we're doing is really the best approach to doing that. We're going to learn more, and I frankly I think it's wonderful what's happened in New York State up to this point, because the New York State has really created a standard for the whole country in terms of dealing with this pandemic. And hopefully we're going to continue on that trajectory. But one of the reasons that we will continue on it is by making the right decisions now. And so I think, I feel like as a college, as a commuter college in the city of New York, we're on the right track with doing what we're doing, in contrast to what the city schools will be doing.
Mr. President, I might just add that this morning I was part of a national conversation on what you just talked about, what other institutions are doing. I am on the Academic Innovation Strategies Committee of the Association of Chief Academic Officers. But what was interesting in those conversations, even in other parts of the country where we've had schools reopen, in Nebraska, for example, where one of the committee members comes from, at his own institution, they have 30% in-person instruction. And they have actually mandated that anyone that comes to campus will have to wear a mask. But there's a question, that the governor is saying, if you don't have to wear masks. So there's this contradictory messaging from those in authority to what even the leaders of higher education are saying. In another institution in Kentucky, where my other colleague, who is a committee member, is from, they have a required testing for all of their students. They're coming back. Every institution is different. And they have a mobile testing unit on their campus. And even for students who are asymptomatic, they've identified those. They've come to campus, they look okay, but they're actually not okay until they've gone through that test. And so what they've done is to set up a separate residence hall where they actually quarantine students who test positive for the virus, and then they stay there in isolation for 14 days, and then they rejoin the rest of the campus community. So each institution is handling that differently. The good thing with where we are in New York, as you mentioned, is that we began early on to address this with the approach we've taken, and that's why we still continue to take a very cautious approach and eventually get us to where we want to all be.
Yeah, I think one of the analogies that I heard the other day is, you could look at making a change like throwing a light switch, it's on or off, we're on campus or we're off. But really what we're doing is more like adjusting a valve. And we can slowly open it very carefully, making sure that nothing has spun out of control and there aren't any adverse things happening, and then we can open it a little more. And that's really been our approach. And we have to err on the side of maybe doing that a little more slowly and being more careful, because the consequences of not doing that and going too quickly, making a mistake, are just really too severe. And we don't want to be there. So we're going to be on the side of slowly doing that. And there won't be any switch throwing for some time, probably. And we will all be rejoicing when we can do that.
I must also add that where institutions are now beginning, as part of this conversation that I was part of, they're thinking, I recall in one of our earlier discussions, President Lemons, you had talked about looking beyond COVID. And at some, so these conversations about what we do next, they're already beginning to happen, and very pleased that Lehman is part of those national conversations.
Yeah. And there are, I think that's a really good point that you're making. So we tend to be really focused in these briefings, a lot of kind of on what's really in front of us at this moment. But we have a lot of major things going on at the college that really are forward thinking, and the strategic planning process is moving forward. We are working on new projects and new initiatives. We really haven't stopped doing that. And so there's a lot that we're looking forward to. And, that since we haven't really, even though we've been in this virtual mode, that hasn't really prevented that.
That's correct.
I'd like to just add something to a slightly earlier discussion you had about, taking it slowly and doing it one step at a time. I want to dispel the thought that once our plan is approved, it's going to be like snap, we're flipping a switch and everybody returns. That's not how our plan is calling for it. In fact, we're suggesting that everyone stay remote. Everyone that's identified that they're working remotely successfully, faculty and staff, classes, will continue to be remote. What we're, the way we're kind of operating now, and most faculty and staff know this, if you need access to campus, you schedule access, you pre-screen, you take the training, you pre-screen, you come to campus, you get what you need, you get your mail, you pick up your supplies, and then you leave and you continue working from home. And I think that's what we're going to see for quite some time, at least through the next semester, until something dramatic changes. So we're not flipping a switch. We're taking it very slow. We're keeping an eye on everything, and we're continuing to operate in the same manner as we have, with the few exceptions of classes that will be in a kind of hybrid mode where some are on campus slightly in a staggered schedule.
So I'm watching the Q&A. I don't think I've seen any more questions come in. I'm going to just cruise up here and just see if there's anything that we've missed that we can answer here. One of the questions requests was that we make available links to some of the articles that I referred to, and we can do that for sure. Yeah, we can easily follow up with links to those. So you can, if you want to read in more detail, you can. A question I just noticed here, which is one I think we've talked about in previous briefings, but it's really about what happens if COVID-19 goes away mid-semester. Will we switch back to in-person? First of all, I think I can say with great certainty it won't. I think a more probably way to adapt that question is to say, what about the spring semester? Because there's more uncertainty there, because we don't know what is the progress on a vaccine and whether something in a phase 3 trial really gets to the point where it's conclusive enough that that vaccine really gets disseminated. And so I think, what would happen in the middle of spring term, if we got to the point where we're feeling confident, that I think is something that we probably would find much easier to answer and to respond to than anything we've responded to so far. What we would need is good information, but if we felt confident, I think we would probably find that reversing what we've done would probably be not that difficult to do. We'd have to do it carefully, but right now, the focus on the fall term, we really know that's not going to happen in the fall term. And so that's a bridge we'll cross when we have much more information. January is going to be a completely different era from where we are right now. That is for sure. And hopefully it's going to be one that's looking much better, but it's going to be, all I can say that I feel totally confident of is it will be different from now. And we'll have different ideas about what's happening in the spring. So I think we've pretty much covered what's come in. And so what I would like to do is wrap this up. Provost Nwosu, Vice President Rotolo, anything else that you would like to add before we bring this to a close?
I would simply, I think there was another question perhaps from a student who did ask when they would, where they would access the MiFi. And I'll say the same process we followed with student affairs is where one applies, and we will send reminders again, because I know it's pretty hard when what we did in summer, folks may not remember that process, but it's the same protocol, but we'll send again a reminder from our student affairs. Great. And then they work together with IT division to process the request and then get that very quickly to students as soon as we have them. The final point, Mr. President, I like to mention is we are not alone in this. You know, every institution is going to be different nationally. We're part of a system, and CUNY has, as a system, has done a great job in terms of guiding us through this process. But we've also, as Lehman, we took early steps to engage this process and worked very closely with our deans, our chairs, and our faculty. I just want to acknowledge the emotional drain this has been on everyone. This has not been easy work. And so it's, and our students as well who have been resilient throughout this process, and faculty and staff who have continued to be patient and engage and work with all of our campus community. As we said at the beginning, this too shall come to pass, and we just take it, as you mentioned, Mr. President, one day at a time, very carefully mindful of the health and safety of members of our community. And I look forward to a very productive fall semester.
And I'll just add to the Provost's words that the staff has done a tremendous, tremendous job working remotely. They haven't missed the beat, they haven't dropped the ball, and things are moving as if we're all in person working. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you so much for your hard work, your dedication, and your continued dedication to Lehman College.
And I'll add my thanks to both the faculty and staff too, because this has been a pretty extraordinary time. And what I have observed is really an extraordinary response. And I don't think any of us really would have doubted that that would happen. Nonetheless, it has been really quite amazing to see how the college and everybody in the college has responded to it. Not without our issues and not without difficulties, but just has really stepped up and done a pretty amazing job. And I expect that same thing will continue in this new academic year that we're rapidly approaching. So as we wind this up, there's just one final thing that I want to remind us all about, and that is we still have a census going on. Census 2020 is still underway. And so far, we know that there is a big issue with undercounting. And I'm sure the pandemic has been a factor in that, a huge factor. But if there's any way that you can reach out and to those who may not have responded, any way that you can do that is going to help, because if New York gets seriously undercounted and we're relying on population models that may really not be very beneficial, particularly to large urban areas, then it's going to really deeply impact federal funding to New York City, to New York State. So any way that you can to motivate filling out that census and getting it completed will be really an effort well worth it. So with that, I'd like to, again, wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Vice President Rotolo, for joining us again. Have a good afternoon, everyone.